very good evening, community. I hope to find you well and in the best mood to listen to the following stories. In this episode, there are very close stories that could happen to us at any moment, especially if we have the fortune of attending a funeral home. But there are also stories that tell us about encounters with legends. Stories that will let us know that some myths told in rural areas are much more real than we imagine. Turn off the light and let yourself go. You are listening to Tales of the Night. I'm Jorge from Aguascalientes, and I've only been listening to tales for a few months. The truth is, it's already become my company in the office because I spend 10 hours stuck in there. I want to tell something that didn't happen to me directly. It happened to my mom, and I clarify this from the beginning, because in my family we almost never talk about paranormal things. My mom is zero into those topics. She has never seen anything, never tells strange things, nothing. That's more the family of my wife, who are like the gypsies of the Triana neighborhood and bring stories to throw upward. But well, it's not the time to tell those. What I'm going to tell started on December 24th, 2024. It was literally the saddest Christmas Eve we've ever lived. Because that day in the afternoon, my great-uncle Chewy passed away. For me, he was like my grandfather. I loved him a lot, and since it was a holiday and the offices were closed, the cemetery, the wake lasted 2 full days. We ended up spending the night of the 25th to the 26th at the funeral home. He didn't have a wife or children, so only his nephews and great-nephews were there, trying to accompany him and pray for him to rest. Around 5 o'clock, I couldn't sleep anymore, and I got up from the couch to go get a coffee. That couch faced a window that overlooked the central courtyard of the funeral home on a 2nd floor. When I moved, I accidentally woke up my mom. I asked her if she wanted something hot because it was cold, but she said no, that she wanted to keep trying to sleep. So she settled back in and closed her eyes. And it was right in that moment, at that point where you're falling asleep again, when she heard something that made her open her eyes suddenly. She said, "I don't want to die." She says she heard a scream, but a real scream. Desperate, anguished, like from someone who was suffering tremendously, that said, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Just like that. My mom opened her eyes all scared and turned to look at her sisters and cousins and saw how they all woke up the same way, as if they had been pulled from sleep. They looked at each other, but nobody said anything. And before they could react properly, it was heard again, exactly the same. That's when they all realized it hadn't been a dream. One of them asked if they had also heard it. Another said, "What was that?" But nobody had an explanation. They didn't know what to do. They just started praying. It was the only thing that came out at that moment. The most curious thing is that day my mom didn't tell me anything. I don't know if from exhaustion or because she doesn't like to talk about those things. I found out months later when I went to see her with my wife to tell her something strange that had happened to us at home. And then she told me, "Well, if you're already telling this, I'm also going to tell you something." Time later, we found out that the room where we were that night is above the place where they prepare the bodies of the deceased before passing them to their families. Honestly, I don't know whether to call it a morgue, but what do you think, community? That at the moment of death, the soul detaches immediately from the body, or perhaps if you're not prepared, the soul clings to staying a little longer. Thanks for listening. Hello, Uriel for the Tales of the Night team, and one in the nicest community on the internet. I hope to be able to hear this story on the channel because it's something I feel you might like, and also, I'd like to see if someone can help me. My name is Segundo Solange. I had the opportunity to share a story with you through Uriel's voice some time ago. I don't know if anyone remembers. That haunted house in La Primera, the little town in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I have to admit, I had to stay away from tales for a while, for work reasons. The day isn't enough for me to be able to listen to them. But luckily recently, I was able to change my job, and now I have one that allows me to enjoy the tales of people from everywhere while I create crafts in my workshop. But I'm not writing to tell you that. I bring you a story more lived in my own flesh together with a relative and a friend in the same town as the previous story, here in La Prida. I'll stop rambling and tell you my experience. Since some time I've been living in the countryside with my great aunt and uncle. As you can imagine, the tranquility and peace you feel in this area is something that can't be explained with words. This calm, obviously, is an escape for some people from their hectic city lives, as is the case with my friend Rafa, whom I'll call Chino in this story. Chino had told me he wanted to come for a weekend to the countryside. He was quite overwhelmed by the city, to which I responded asking him to please come, that I would be waiting for him with pleasure. I told my aunt and uncle that Chino was coming, and since they already know him, they were happy with the news. A week passed, and the day came to pick him up from the town terminal, and then return to the ranch. On the way, we talked about things to do in the days he was going to stay. We wanted to go hunting, take care of the cattle, ride the horses, and some other jobs I had planned to do with him. When we got home, my aunts received him warmly, and soon we were helping to set the table for dinner. During dinner, we told my uncle our intentions for the following days, which he accepted immediately, the vast majority except for going hunting. It should be clarified that I had already tried to go hunting with him, but he always had an excuse not to do it, and since this time I was with Chino, I planned to use him as a little help so he would agree to go hunting. My uncle looked at us both for a second and then continued explaining why he refused, putting up a silly excuse, when my aunt rested her hand on his wrist and said something that left Chino and me puzzled. "What if you take your cross?" My uncle was silent for a while, and then said he would accept the offer, and that the next day he was going to town to buy the bullets for the following night. We obviously were happy, and quickly forgot my aunt's comment. The next day was full of preparations. We cleaned the weapons, prepared the magazines and a bag with food for the road. The idea was to go quite deep into the woods to look for deer or wild boars, whatever we found during the preparations. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that my uncle was muttering between his teeth or making faces like resignation, as if he knew why we shouldn't go. Later that same day, I was in my workshop with Chino, when I remembered I had to put gas in the truck. My workshop is to the right of the house if you look at it from the front, and the shed where the vehicle is kept is to the left, so I had to pass by the front of the house to get there. When I was passing by the window of my aunt and uncle's room, I heard my aunt tell her husband, "I've already seen it a couple of times and nothing happened to you. You know, with that cross, you're perfect. I have mine here, so don't worry. Go with the boys." I passed by slowly to finish listening to that, and then I remembered what my aunt had said to my uncle the day before. That's when I started to suspect something. A cross so he wouldn't worry? I don't know. Countryside superstitions, I thought. When night came, we got in the truck, said goodbye to my aunt, and the three of us headed to the woods. Everything was at night, with our headlights and flashlights pointing to the sides, hoping to see an animal. When we reached the foot of a hill, we decided to park the truck there and climb the woods on foot. We wanted to go as quietly as possible to be able to hear the animals. Getting out of the vehicle, we realized that silence surrounded us. It wasn't dark because the moon illuminates much more in the countryside, but there was no sound. Absolutely nothing. It seemed curious to us, but not exaggerated. So we climbed the hill until we reached a path that the pigs used to get to their piglets. Then we prepared ourselves among some grasses and waited for them. I'll try to explain that place where we were, so you can have a clear image of the space. Imagine a flat dirt path. Look to your left. Imagine a stone wall about 5 meters high with some trees at the top. To the right, imagine a slight slope and more or less at the height of the path. The tops of some pines, given the slope of the terrain, which makes the trees grow from much lower. We went to hide in some grasslands that were on the left side of the path, staying against the wall. We waited and waited 10 minutes, 20, 30, an hour, and nothing happened. However, a rather cold breeze began to be felt, which made the treetops dance. My uncle had his hands clasped over his knees and his back against the wall, if he wasn't prepared for anything, but he also seemed expectant. My friend was also anxious. After a while longer, something was heard. The three of us raised our weapons very slowly, so as not to make noise or alert anyone who might be walking around there. If you remember what the landscape I explained to you was like, you'll remember the dirt slope to the right of the path, right? Well, there's no way to reasonably explain what happened next. In front of us, the crunch of dry pine twigs on the ground began to be heard, near the edge of the path downward, leaving whatever was there still unseen. Something was coming up. The sound was increasingly recurrent, closer, and at times slower. But it was there, moving about 5 meters away more or less. One moment. That sound stopped and then began to climb the slope toward the path, approaching it. Us ready behind the bushes, with our fingers on the triggers of the shotguns. From behind the path it began to appear. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a wild boar. It wasn't a puma either. It was something worse. A child. A short human child. About 1.30 meters it would be. You could see how he was trying to climb onto the path from behind the slope, because we saw his hands grabbing grass to be able to climb. Of everything that could have climbed the slope, a child was the last thing we thought of. My friend began to lower his weapon and barely raised his head to clarify the image of what he was seeing, and then try to move toward the little one. I saw how my uncle grabbed his arm firmly, but very carefully to maintain silence. He made us a sign not to make noise, and there I noticed on his wrist, which he had raised to point to his mouth with his index finger, a rosary with a white silver cross. He had a tear on his right cheek. I turned, my gaze toward the child. I saw him already standing in the middle of the path. The little one had his arms tilted toward his chest, touching his fingers to each other, like when a child gets lost and waits for his mother to come find him. His strange clothing had a red little poncho, dark green shorts, and some shoes that were very old. It was a strange outfit with his skin. His skin was pale. You can surely already imagine it. A bone-colored skin, whitish. The part of the legs that showed after. The pants were stained with dirt, actually, and dark stains, especially on the knees. His face, his head. My God, his head was swollen. I don't know how to explain it. It looked as if many bees had stung him at once. It was full of scratches all over his face. His black hair was organized in strands along his head, giving the appearance of hair like that of old dolls whose hair falls out. His eyes were just as swollen as his face. Red eyelids and no eyelashes were visible. Then I noticed his hands, which I hadn't looked at more than to see his posture. They were torn, as if he had been pulling on a bramble or scratching cement. You could see the bones through his fingers, and his wrists were purple. The vision of that thing is interrupted by a sound, a kind of crying mixed with something. I don't know what exactly, but it was a very deep cry. It seemed that at the moment of inhaling the air it exhaled and vice versa. When exhaling it seemed to inhale. I don't know how to explain it. In addition, it seemed to add a rasp, as if it didn't have a throat to be able to make those noises. It began to move its head to various sides. They weren't erratic movements, they were premeditated. It seemed it was looking for something specific. It really looked like the scene of a child looking for his mother. It was terribly heartbreaking to see him standing there crying. At one point, while moving his head, the boy made a sound like a gasp, like when you want to cry but nothing comes out, like releasing a load of trapped air, and with that sound, at that moment the child looked toward us. My uncle was praying. If he wasn't trying to cover his mouth, I had my pure hands on the shotgun. The child began to sob. He stopped crying, but it was also a very strange sob, very raspy and deep. I didn't look directly into his eyes that at times let you see inside, whitish eyes like the color of the moon. That image is going to haunt me for a long time in my life, maybe until my death. The child standing in the middle of the path, crying without doing anything. Looking at us with an expression between sadness, frustration, and regret, as if something terrible had occurred. Suddenly the child stopped crying and looked at the three of us. One moment, at each one. While my uncle prayed, Chino cried and I remained in shock. Then he slightly turned his body and walked away in the opposite direction from where we came. And that was the end of the apparition. As soon as it left our sight, the three of us came out of that state of paralysis and walked to the path. From there we returned to the truck, attentive at every corner of the path, attentive to every stone, looking behind every tree. I think the journey to the vehicle was the experience in which I felt most watched in my entire life. I felt that a child was following us. Who knows what other things were roaming the area? We didn't want to know. When we finally reached the truck, we noticed that the sounds of the night were heard. The crickets, the birds, etc. We got in quickly, and before returning to the ranch, I looked one last time at the woods. There I thought I saw it with its hands together on its chest, its little poncho and its black hair. And in fact, I thought I saw something next to it, a figure taller than him, with long hair and a long light nightgown. His mother, his grandmother, something else? I didn't want to know, and I didn't mention this last part to the others. Returning to the ranch, my uncle looked at me still with the cross in his hands and told me, "This is why I didn't want to come. I don't know what it is or what it wants. Today it's here, in the woods, and other times I see it closer to home. Sometimes it's in the pasture, other times at the ranch. Other times I see it at sunset, standing in the middle of the field, walking without apparent direction. I don't know who it is or what it wants. The only thing I do is avoid it and pray for whatever that is, for its rest, for protection, or for other things. For whatever, as long as it's not at peace." My uncle's words made me feel like a fool for not realizing before the reason for his refusal, the reason for my aunt's words. When we arrived at the ranch, we went to sleep quickly, the three of us. Luckily, nothing else happened that night. Later I found out that my aunt stayed talking with my uncle, helping him make coffee and listening to him while he told her what we had experienced. I know this because my aunt told me a few days later. The next morning, I saw Chino prepare his bag and said goodbye to him at the door, watching as my uncle took him to town, saying goodbye along the way. And I don't know if it was a reflection or something like that, but as they were leaving among the trees beside the road, I thought I saw them again, very far away, very blurry, but seeing them again both, side by side, under a eucalyptus, near a silo. But I hope it was just that, a reflection, a glimpse of memory of my fears. Obviously, Chino doesn't want to return to the countryside, and my uncle looks at me with a bad face when I make jokes about going hunting. I also trying to distract myself and try to forget the events that occurred that night in the woods. It's the only way I have to deal with that. To laugh. I hope you liked my story, community. I hope someone can help me. Please leave a comment. I want to get rid of the doubt of what that child or that thing could be, and if you think it could be accompanied or not. Thank you, Uriel, for the space. If that story gets to be read by you on the channel, greetings to the team and the community, and I wish you all a happy day, a happy night, a good life. Greetings. My name is Andrea. I've been listening to you for a long time, and although I've experienced several things, this was the first and the strongest. It took me a while to decide, but I finally got the courage to share it because of the trust I have in you. This occurred around 2017, when we were studying at CBTI's, a public high school. A friend's grandmother had passed away, and since we were a very close group of girls, we decided to accompany her during the viewing of the body. That day, after classes, We traveled from Cuautla to Claudia Kaplan. The atmosphere was very calm in the house where they had the body, very peaceful. There was a long hallway that led to a living room where they had the body. We didn't go in. We just hugged our friend and sat down for the prayer. The chairs were arranged along the hallway, and I stayed all the way in the back, almost facing the street.
Andrea.
In the middle of the prayer, out of nowhere, I heard someone whisper my name very clearly in my ear.
Andrea.
I turned to the left very scared, but there was no one. I stayed motionless thinking that maybe it was my nerves, but when I turned to the other side I saw one of my friends with the same scared face as me. "Did you hear it?" she said to me. I just nodded. We smiled at each other nervously and stayed quiet. In the end, we commented on it with the others, but since everything was so recent, the morning, we didn't want to dwell on a simple whisper. That night I arrived very tired at my house. I shared a room with my younger sister. I changed, lay down, and fell asleep almost instantly. Already in the early morning, I woke up, checked my phone. 3:15. I felt very tired, so I just settled in and tried to go back to sleep. The next day was normal. I told my mom about the whisper, but she didn't take it as something important. She just told me to pray. That night I had that restlessness. I fell asleep quite quickly. But again I woke up. In the early morning, I looked at the time again. 3:15, same as the night before. And there I did feel something different in the room, as if there was someone else. It wasn't a sensation, it was a certainty. I wanted to move to get comfortable, and couldn't. I was completely immobile. And from the corner of my eye I saw something standing next to my bed. A very black shadow with a tall hat. I felt a fear I don't even know how to describe. I didn't close my eyes. I just stayed there, watching that silhouette without moving until it started to dawn, and with the light it stopped being visible. I didn't tell anyone because I was sure they weren't going to believe me. I went to school, but I couldn't concentrate. All day I was tense, hoping night wouldn't come, that the day would be eternal for me. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment when again I was going to feel totally at the mercy of something I didn't understand. That night I prayed and went, as my mom told me. I fell asleep praying and it happened again. I woke up in the early morning, but this time I didn't even want to see the time. I was afraid that again the clock would say 3:15. Out of the corner of my eye I confirmed that there it was again. The same shadow, just as still, with that hat. The fear was worse. I felt cold, but at the same time I was sweating. We couldn't see anything of the body, just a little bit of the head. I tried to convince myself it was sleep paralysis, that this happens, that it's common. But I was perfectly conscious. I was completely awake. With all the strength I could, I started calling my sister softly Fernanda. I thought she wasn't going to hear me, but she got up, saw me, and her face completely changed. She asked me what was wrong and I asked her to go get my mom. My mom came in with the Bible in her hand, sat down with me, started praying, was caressing my legs and feet. And her face? Her worry. I'll never forget. She stayed with me like that until dawn. Only then, you can stop feeling that deep fear. She went to sleep for a while and I finally fell half asleep. After that, nothing so strong happened. But the room, I don't know, was left with a very bad vibe. As if something had stayed there. More things happened. Voices were heard when there was no one. The lights turned off on their own constantly. But I was no longer as afraid. Like that night. Not that much. To this day, no one sleeps in that room. I don't understand if there's a connection. The voice in the funeral home with what I started living. I don't understand if something left with me, if something stuck to me, or if something that was already there woke up, but it was never the same again. Thank you for reading my story. I hope someday I can hear it here with you. Hello, Uriel. My name is Javier. I'm writing this story to you together with my friend Baldo. We grew up in a very small community in the northern Sierra of Puebla, named La Pixalapa in La Puebla, where in fact there is only one transport per day to get there. More than a paranormal story, it's an event that leaves us thinking to this day. This didn't happen to us, but to a man from town whose name I won't say out of respect for him and his family. This story goes back to the end of 2022, when an elderly man, whom we'll call Don Octavio, disappeared. That man was someone very well known in town, characterized by his humor, plus he was somewhat of a drunk and most people loved him. And he always greeted you with a smile and on top of a hill, which coincidentally is 2 minutes from the community cemetery. In our case, whenever we saw him we would shout, "Don Octavio," and he always responded with a strange but funny phrase, "Kill chicken before they throw me in the hole." I know it's a phrase that makes no sense, but it was what characterized him. Well, one rainy afternoon in the community, Don Octavio left, according to the neighbors, to buy some beers to pass the time, the usual for days like those. Only the nearest store was 15 minutes away, as the road would fill with mud. But he never arrived at the store, not that one or any other in town. His last sighting was walking near the cemetery, somewhat worried about the rain. From that moment on, no one knew about him, or at least about his whereabouts. That night passed and his family, alerted, asked for help to go out and look for him, since they thought he had gotten drunk at some store and might be outside like the other drunks. But no, he simply wasn't there. In the following days, the search continued. Police came and even the National Guard. And this was very strange because, in this community, being very remote, security people don't come from the municipality, and much less the Guard. This alerted the community, and everyone helped in the search. Most of the community is woods, coffee plantations or pastures, so they didn't rule out that because of his drunkenness he might have gone up and had an accident or something like that, but no one found anything. They searched every place, every nook and cranny, and also did a search in the town's river that used to grow from the rains. That river has stories of quite paranormal events. Hard to believe, but I'll tell you that another time. No one found anything in the river, not a trace of his clothes. They also ruled out the idea of a kidnapping, as there's never entry of strangers, even less because people would notice a strange vehicle. And to get to the largest town, it's 2.5 hours on a dirt road, and to leave on the other side you'd have to walk 3 hours uphill. So no one knew what happened. I swear to you, Uriel, it was as if the earth had swallowed him, or as if something else had taken him. Those nights the owls sang in the town everywhere, and you know they say that's a bad omen. So people thought the worst. Then what happened here is what one starts to think. My friend Baldo's great-grandmother told us about a bird with a long red beak that was in charge of disappearing people it saw wandering at night in the rain. She told us that to scare us for always being out at night. According to her, that bird turned into a kind of enormous birdman that could carry people away flying. Obviously we didn't believe her, and jokingly we said to her, "So that bird took Don Octavio." That day, everything was normal. Until at night, around 2:30 in the morning, my friends and I came down after finishing playing soccer. And we saw something in the fog, right by the church bell tower, which is also very close to Don Octavio's house and the cemetery. We saw a large man dressed completely in black. He moved as if he were soaked with water, shaking his body with clumsy, strange movements, as if he were exhausted. That afternoon it had rained, but what seemed strange to us was that we didn't know that person. When he saw we were looking at him, he stood still and then decided to get down from the bell tower very quickly, almost running. We by instinct and distrust decided to run away until arriving at the cemetery. I swear to you. Community. We clearly heard on top of a tree how something very, very heavy fell. We all looked up, and there was that bird we had recently been told about. The plumage was an intense black color that was barely visible thanks to a dim light from a light post and that damn red beak we had been warned about. I swear, it doesn't look like any real bird. It just looked at us and started shaking its wings, but it did it exactly the same as the person we had seen at the church bell tower, the same movement as if from tiredness. I was left in shock, scared. Our other friends also knew the story and were also filled with fear. Then in that paralysis we heard something else, a whisper, a voice that I swear to you, community, was nothing human, but told us,
"Boys, stop being gossipy. That old man's time had come."
Hearing that, pure adrenaline and fear made us come out of that paralysis. We all ran out, each one to his house, while we saw how the bird flew over the pasture straight toward the hill toward where Octavio, may he rest in peace, used to live. To this day, we find no explanation between the event of his disappearance and our encounter with that birdman. Currently, we no longer live there. We decided to leave to different places to study high school, because in town the high school is in terrible condition, but we still talk about it when we meet, and although we don't want to accept it, deep down we know that that damn creature is real. Greetings, community. Have a good night. And if you ever hear a strong, enormous flapping in the rain, don't look out. Don't look outside. Don't turn toward the treetops.